Well, as you've heard me mention in other videos, you want to check your work as you go along. So all that we've done is we've replaced this wooden component board and wired it back up where we were early on in the game before we installed the motor and did so many other things. And so now we're testing to make sure that we've done everything correctly. And as it turned out, I had 2 wires reversed, but luckily I caught it, no harm done. So anybody can make a mistake. I had it recorded correctly. I had things labeled. Somehow I just counted wrong when I was counting my terminals or something. Anyway, I had 2 reversed. I had the ignition coming into the reverse and reverse going to the ignition. So the ignition wouldn't come on until you hit the reverse button. That's something new. But anyway, looks like our 12-volt battery could use a charge. It's just been sitting for a while. But anyway, yeah, we're at the point now, we're back at kind of a benchmark here where everything we'd previously done is installed and working. So now what we're going to do is we got to take all the connections that go from, that was the vacuum pump kicking on. So comes on with the ignition automatically. So we got to connect, from the vehicle wiring, such as our instrumentation up front and other things that have to connect to our main component board here in the engine bay, and then there's connections that go between this board and the wooden board above. And so that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to connect all those items up. We also have, like I said before, our pilot and proximity lines coming in from the the J1772, and so those have to be done. This brown wire hanging here, this goes over to the menu switch, which will be over here. It's a brown wire. Boom. Know right where it is because we maintain the same color code throughout the vehicle, so it's easy to recognize things. So once things are finished being wired up, once things are finished being wired, then we will do our testing and everything. Once everything's tested and confirmed working, then we loom things up and tidy things up. But it never fails, if you do that first, then you're going to have a problem. It's just kind of guaranteed. You have to undo something you've already done. So slight vacuum leak, as I'd mentioned early on when we did the brakes, and we tested it. It is, but it's either if I remember correctly, I think it's the vacuum booster has a slight leak, because we replaced the line and tested from the vacuum booster all the way back, and so the leak was the booster, not in the system that we added. So anyway, something for the owner to do, replace the vacuum booster. Well, that's it. We'll continue doing the wiring, and like I mentioned, test as you go. It's easier to test each step of the way than to do a whole bunch and then find out something's not working later on. And I think we'll put a charger on this battery too. So, speaking of the wiring, people will ask, where do you start? This is an aspect that a lot of people don't like to do, are intimidated by, whatever. And to me, it's the most enjoyable part. I think it's very, easy to do in something like this. And so my, method and what I would recommend is you start from your battery and go out. So, you have all these different circuits that are going to start from the battery, and we have things that are unswitched and things that are switched. And for instance, we talked about before our power relay. And so when the ignition's turned on, then all these switched circuits go through our separate fuse block. We're not, affecting the original stock chassis wiring at all. We're coming directly from the battery to a terminal strip, and we're taking all of our unswitched stuff off of that terminal strip, so basically directly from the battery. And then things that we want ignition controlled are controlled by our power relay through a fuse block. And so just do, the circuit, from point A to point B to point C and so forth. And point A would be positive battery, and you'll end at your negative chassis ground. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go through and I'm going to start with my ignition system, and that is what's going to turn on the controller, and that's the KSI relay. And so we have a few systems that we have to go through. So we're going to have our the AVC2, which is used with our safety interlock relay. We're going to go through our JLD404 for our low voltage cutout, and then we're going to go through inertia switch, and then we go to that KSI relay, which would allow us to have traction pack voltage go to the KSI input. So that will be the circuit I will do first. And then, we already have the power brakes, so that's another circuit, starts at the battery. But that's already done. And so I'll just, systematically go through all of these and make sure they're wired up. And once I have all those done, then, that's my master schematic. Then I'm going to go and refer to the HPVS schematic. The HPVS schematic, a lot of that's already done. The main contactor, that's part of our, our component board in the engine bay. And so the coil return, the KSI input, that's all done on that board. The things that we're going to use, so the economy mode, so we have to connect that one up, I think. The menu switch, of course the menu switch is in the dash, so that's one that I just talked about a moment ago. We connected that one. Forward and reverse, well, we need to, the forward and reverse relay is up here. It's this relay right here. And again, we have our yellow wire, which is reverse, it's on the normally open, and the white wire, which is forward, is on the normally closed. So the default position, if this relay were to fail or whatever, we always have forward. But anyway, we need to go from there, which is these two terminal points right here. Those two need to go to that board in the engine bay, to our forward and reverse. That's, the input to the controller. So, and then of course, the rest of that circuit is your 12-volt control, which goes over here to the common on that relay. So it's just a matter of, following simple, schematic. And we'll go down the list and we'll do one at a time and make sure that everything is wired up appropriately, and we'll test them as we go. Almost all of the 12 volt wiring is done. All that's left is the DC to DC converter, which is going to go up in this corner over here and real close to the battery. And that's about it for the 12 volt system. It's all completed. And like I said, once everything is done, things will be loomed and taken care of in that regard. So next, after the DC to DC converter, we need to run our traction pack. So we've got the positive to the switch, and we've got the negative to the shunt. We have one of the links out, interconnect is missing in the pack, so we won't have the potential here while we're working on it. So next will be, in regards to the traction pack, to connect from the switch, I believe I mentioned it before, over to the main contactor, and of course main contactor to the inverter, and shunt to the inverter, and then of course inverter to motor connections. We also have the connection for the Curtis 840 display. We've run it in the front, part way back, and we're going to run from here as far forward as it'll go, but the buses are longer than what they supply, and so we have to splice a piece in the middle. And so, and then of course the encoder setup, but that's one of the last things we do. So once we've got that, we can, start charging. We'll put that last link in, check everything as far as, and we triple check before we flip that switch the first time. And then once everything's checked and good to go, then we'll plug her in and start charging the pack. And while the pack's charging, we'll be doing the, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do this one. We do them all different. And this vehicle's been somewhat unique, and so we might do something unique with the panel in the back here. I don't know. But anyway, we got to put our ABS panel in, and then once the panel's in, we do our cooling system, and we got to do the throttle still. Just a few little wrap-up items. Like I said, once everything's running as it should, or operating as it should, then we'll loom everything up, because it's kind of a mess now. It just needs to be housed neatly and contained. So getting close. When you're doing multiple vehicles at the same time, it's a little crazy, but this one has risen to the top of the heap because we've got everything we need, and this next week it'll be done, or probably be done this week. So, but not the week that you're watching the video. The videos aren't in real time. They're shot way in advance and posted when we have time. So that's the status of the bus. Getting very close to being complete, and looking forward to this one rolling out of here. Trickle charger plugged in for the night so that it will get that battery topped off. It dropped down a little bit because it's just been sitting. So That's the beauty of these hardwired trickle chargers, is we can just plug it in and not worry about that 12-volt auxiliary battery. The traction pack charger also charges the auxiliary battery when it's, you know, when we're plugged in, charging the traction pack. It's also going to be charging the 12-volt battery, which is nice. And that's a wrap for tonight. Well, here's the engine bay of the bus in the state of kind of things installed but not finished by any means. We still have to loom things, route things a little bit, you know, tie them up, that kind of thing. But we're in the testing mode. We've tested all the DC stuff. We've got all of the 12-volt wiring done. We've got the 12-volt DC to DC converter installed. It's working. Had a little issue with it. They sent the pigtail that goes in here to the enable. That was incorrect. They had it to where it was going to the red wire instead of the brown wire. So it was kind of a pain to try. They epoxied over the ends of the connector, the mating side there, the pin holes that weren't being used. So we just cut that and spliced into it, and that works now. But that took a few minutes of troubleshooting to figure out why it wasn't working. We were getting our 12 volts and everything, but it was the wrong input. And luckily we had another one to look at, which made it kind of quick and easy to say, hey, this is not how they normally are. And so we've got the component board on the left side here wired up. We got our inertia switch installed. Finished all of our traction pack wiring. We've got the coolant reservoir installed, and of course all the connections for the charger. So the charger in the J1772, that part was already done, but we had to hook it up so that the charger output went to our switch and, you know, to our traction pack. The negative side is on the top terminal of the shunt there. Also our DC to DC converter comes out of there, as well as you know, the charger and the inverter negatives. So this is the initial charge. It is charging, and it was almost 15 amps. Then it'll drop down. It will continue to drop down. We're just charging at 110, but it's at 14 amps right now. Pack voltage is 106.2. It was 99.8 when we started. Okay, it was bottom balanced, and that's pretty much what it's showing. So we've only put just less than 1.8 amp hours in. So we have a long ways to go, but it's on its way. So, what's left? Well, the last big test will be to spin up the motor. We like to check the charging first, make sure we can charge our traction pack. We'll put a charge in it for a while, and then what we'll do is we'll put the fuse in for KSI input. That's this inline fuse right there by the KSI relay, That allows us to turn on the ignition now, and the KSI is not affected. But what we'll do is we'll put that fuse in, and of course we have to hook up our encoder to the wiring harness to the inverter, and then we'll be ready to test it out, make sure she spins, does what she's supposed to. And prior to that, we'll well, not prior to that, before we spin it up, we'll program the inverter. We got to program the throttle type, the deadband, max throttle, and we know what we set these things at. So we'll go through and do all the programming, and then the testing, and then once everything is working, then we'll clean things up, loom. You know, you can see fingerprints on things. Fingerprints will be last, but after we have things loomed up and everything, then we'll put our ABS panel in here, do our cooling system. So we still have, you know, the radiator, pump, fans, all that. We have two spots in our fuse block up above, you know, on the wooden component board. One for the cooling fan, and one for the, you know, fans, and one for the pump. And let's see, I think that's just about it. You know, just that tidying up. We got lots of wires just, you know, that are just kind of just hanging, need to be loomed and secured, all of that. So coming along, good to hear the charger, just the fan humming away. See some lines hanging down, but yeah, it's charging, and so far everything has worked the way it should. The only little glitch we had was the DC to DC converter, and we were able to you know, fix that, and everything is rolling. One comment, you know, when we added the DC to DC converter, we had done everything. We'd saved it for last just because of where we locate it in the buses typically, and you know, it's really out of the way. You don't even see it. You know, when you look into the engine bay, you never even notice them. But if you're in there working and everything, that few inches of clearance, I tend to smack my head on anything that I can possibly smack my head on. So I save them for last. But comment I was going to make is that because of the way we do things, using the terminal strips and everything, we're able to attach, you know, the enable, the power. So here's the power, you know, going to the DC to DC converter on the positive side, and like I said, on the negative side it comes off the shunt. But it was just, you know, kind of a plug and play scenario, and so no splicing of things and this and that. It's just, if it ever has to be removed or replaced or whatever, it just unplug and unbolt and swap the new one in real quick and easy, which I thought for a moment we might have to do till we figured out what was going on. So the next time I talk to you here, we will be maybe on the spin up, if I think of it. If not, we'll probably give you an overview of the final you know, the final outcome, what we have when all is said and done.